good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who haven't been listening to the podcast before, you really have missed something, but let me explain the nature of why we're basically doing this. I retired from the bench about 5 years ago, and I decided I really wanted to help educate the public. That's why I wrote the book, which is called From the Trench to the Bench. And not only but to educate, but to provide guidance for people so that they can navigate through the legal system and at the same time get some spiritual result as a result. So our show is not an opinion show. It's a no spin show. We recognize that the media doesn't necessarily report things as they are. There's a big spin. If you watch CNN and then you watch Newsmax, you would think that they're two different facts, but they're the same facts. It's the spin that you get on it. And so you as the audience get a chance to decide the credibility of particular issues. And we invite guests from all sides. In fact, next week I have a very well-known far left liberal who was going to say things that are probably going to be different than Alan Dershowitz said a couple of weeks ago, or David Schoen, who's President Trump's former lawyer. And so we generally provide both sides. I don't have any opinions. I'm not political. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. Some things I agree with on both sides, and some things I strongly disagree with on both sides. So it's not a medical show, although the last 3 out of the last 4 or 5 have dealt with medical issues. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about some medical issues. The first one we did, medical issues, featured my son, actually, who's an endocrinologist, and it was dealing with Ozempic and diabetes. Then we had a person who is a medical doctor who also deals with Parkinson's from the, I guess you could call it the Western medical side. And then we had a person who was experiencing Parkinson's, Rick Shapiro, is a well-known comedy star. And today we are going to have as our guest someone who's extraordinarily experienced and well-educated in Eastern, I call it Eastern medicine, more natural medicine. And then at the end, even though I'm not a doctor, I listen to both sides. And I think with our guest today, whose name is Rachel Canale, I hope I pronounced that name right.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
That was strictly a guess. But, and so I just want to introduce Rachel and tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do. It's called the bio. So tell us a little about your history.
For sure. So I've gotten into using a variety of techniques to help people feel better in their bodies. It started with Pilates and yoga. And then I found that a lot of people, there's a little bit that was missing, and that was the mind element of it, in terms of there's other things you can do to help with your health to make you the best, like to feel your most vibrant health and things like that. So I started looking at other techniques that included just mindfulness and things like that to bring people back into their bodies. I had the opportunity to work at a really special place called the Movement Salon in New York City, where it was really targeted towards all populations. And so I had experience, I started working with people with just things that were not being treated by regular physical therapy and things like that. Or in conjunction with it. And that's kind of where I kind of started to progress myself. So I started working with healthcare and stuff like that, and kind of just post-care and things like that, or things that could help with that. And so that's where I am.
One of the things we're doing is right now we're featuring Parkinson's disease.
Yes.
There's, I think, Dr. Steve said there's 5 or 10 million people around the country or around the world that have Parkinson's. And it's the question of how you treat it. We know it's not curable,
Right.
but treatable.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you from personal experience, because I have Parkinson's, and I go to boxing 3 days a week, called Rock Steady Boxing.
Yeah.
And it's been really wonderful. Fortunately, my cognitive abilities have not been changed. I mean, there's some physical limitations, like you see my head bobbing and things like that. But the reality is, there are ways to alleviate some of the side effects and treat the disease. So that's I'd like to have you focus on that today, and so people who are watching will get a better understanding of what they may have and how they can deal with it and what the prognosis is. And it was interesting that Dr. Steve, who's a medical doctor I think he's in South Carolina, North Carolina, he basically said, you don't die from it, you die with it. So it's not necessarily a death sentence to be diagnosed with it.
Yeah.
But how do you alleviate the symptoms if you can? And what's the long-term prognosis from your view as a specialist in Eastern type of treatment? Sure. So tell us about that.
Sure. So a lot of it with one of the things you might have heard about Eastern versus Western approach. I don't want to say versus, right? But the Eastern approach, that it takes into a little bit more of the mindfulness. But I mean, I got to say that, like, even in terms of like with the boxing, you have to be mindful. You have to, be aware. You have to be completely present with that stuff. And so I think any kind of movement that helps you focus into the body, that helps you, prevent the kind of the gait and things like that, like in terms of losing that sensitivity, is great. And I think that the way that the Eastern approach comes into it is allowing you to explore things that are helping you get the mind connection. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I assume that includes meditation.
100%. 100% meditation. There's a lot of things. It's honestly like just kind of being like understanding how these things can apply to your day, and just being more present through the day through meditation and things like that. But honestly, like from doing boxing and things, that just having that connection of, okay, my mind is doing this and my body's doing this. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And I would say that the thing with Pilates, like the things that I specialize in, I'm not a boxer, right? But I mean, like in terms of the things that I specialize in terms of Pilates and yoga, it's very much that kind of connection. Okay, I have to think about it. I can't just tune out. I'm not just running on a treadmill or something. I'm doing these things. And that's where the mindfulness comes in. And I think that's, the beauty of it.
I used to do Pilates, actually. It's pretty good. Yeah.
Did you like it?
And my daughter goes 2 or 3 times a week, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I agree there's a lot to deal with mindfulness for sure. In fact, my daughter-in-law, who's a psychologist, PhD psychologist, deals with wellness and eating habits and things like that. And maybe I'll have her on the show one day, but the reality is there is a difference between physical and mental.
Yeah.
And I would really like to have you tell us what it is that each of these disciplines accomplishes, and the time it takes, and how do you go about it, and where do you go, and who can you trust, and what can you read? It's a tutorial, I suppose.
I got you. No, 100%. And again, it's a lot of the stuff is kind of, it's off the radar a little bit. Sometimes it gets into the mainstream. Like Pilates, I think, is getting a little bit more. Yoga is getting mainstream too, I think. But it's also, it's nice to know how it applies directly. How it can benefit you directly. So if we're talking about Parkinson's, let's start. We'll kind of break it down between each section. With Pilates and yoga, the thing that Pilates and yoga have in common is the mind-body connection, and very much focusing on that, like on the breathing, like how your movement connects to your breath and things like that. And the difference between the two is Pilates is a little bit more on the functional side, and yoga is a little bit more on the, I mean, I don't want to say spiritual side, but the mental side. But they both kind of, again, both work together quite well. So, for example, so we'll start with Pilates. If I have someone who has Parkinson's that I'm working with one-on-one, and they can work in group environments as well, which can have a benefit as well in terms of that kind of connectivity and like getting feedback from other people in the room and things like that. But on one-on-one, you can really focus on any kind of control issue. We can really get to the we can really focus in on control issues. So, for example, if you're having difficulty and you find that your ankle joint is getting away from you or things like that, right? There's machines in place that keep you really stable, and then you can kind of move into it, and then we can make sure that those muscles around it keep that muscle memory, which is basically when you say about the whole thing about you don't die from Parkinson's, you live with it, right? So we're trying to get all those things like, okay, let's keep everything as functional as possible. So for example, making sure that no muscles kind of turn off by accident because you just like you're not paying attention. You just kind of go into rote, and people do that without Parkinson's, by the way. Like in terms
Oh,
of
I'm sure they do.
tripping over themselves, like you're left-handed, so you favor this side and and like all the rest of it. So it's kind of like we all have these tendencies in us, right? It can kind of like if it gets to a point where like, okay, I need a little bit more help with this, it kind of goes on the same. It's on a spectrum. Is basically how I look at it. And so with Pilates and things like that, we can certainly train to make sure that you are putting equal pressure on both sides and making sure that you're standing upright, you're engaging your core and all those things that really help you find that center.
Yeah, that word core is used all the time.
100%.
Every class that I'm in, and
Yeah.
it's 3 days a week,
Yeah.
they talk about core and the
Yeah.
exercises are designed around the core. So tell us what the core is.
Yeah. So the core is when we talk about it from what you're talking about from boxing, right?
Yeah, but we do a lot of exercises and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So the core is basically the central muscle group. From if you want to think about it, it's basically like your rib cage to where your hips are, and then in the back, from basically the same spot down to your tailbone. And some people include the glutes as well, but it's your stabilizers, right? So, for example, if you've ever seen boxing, right? So from boxing, if you ever like a boxer, even if you haven't, anyone who's listening or who's watching or anything like that, if you haven't seen a boxer or if you've seen a boxer, right, the movement comes from the core. If you move it just from your arm and your shoulder and things like that, you'll get an injury, and that's usually what happens. When we talk about the core, it's the deep stabilizer. So we call it like our stabilizers versus our mobilizers. So there's one part of your body that's moving, right, like your arm or your leg, but you want to stay conscious through the center to make sure, like, I mean, it's kind of beautiful actually, but you want to stay centered. You want to stay centered in a very profound way of like just making sure you're holding your space, and that's what I've worked with athletes and things like that, and it's gotten like much more popular, honestly, Pilates and yoga to help with this stuff.
What exactly does Pilates do?
It puts the focus on where the movement's coming from. So the way that I would like to say it is that it's coming from your core, as opposed to going from the, so for example, in the example of a boxer, right, as opposed to it just being your arm moving, right? It's more if you're moving from here, you can even feel it if anyone makes that movement of where that's coming from, and it's a lot more centered and it's a lot more grounding. Okay. So in terms of why is that important, that's our center of control, right? So that allows us to move with a little bit more control and less injury prone.
Do you recommend Pilates for people, not only Parkinson's, but other people who have similar degenerative?
Honestly, the reasons I got into Pilates was I had I'm hypermobile, right? So I was injuring myself. I would just like walk down the street, I'm like, what? Like fall over. Just like, oh, what happened? Just like this kind of thing. And like, so yes, I would recommend it. Is the short answer. It's just like this thing of just like, it's kind of bringing you back through center, and then you kind of find where you are in center as you're moving, and it's a much nicer. Like it helps you feel more grounded.
Oh, and by the way, when you talk about boxing, this
Mhm.
program called Rock Steady, there's 850 centers around the world.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly unique, but we don't hit
No, it's
anybody.
really exciting.
We don't hit anybody. We hit the bag,
Yeah.
And a lot has to do with movement of your feet and flow and things like that. So it's kind of all body. We also combine breathing exercises and stretching. So for us, it's kind of a smorgasbord of different things. So that's Pilates. Now, yoga's been popular forever.
Yoga's been popular. Yes. So in terms of what yoga can offer to it, it's this kind of flexibility. I think that there's a little bit more of this idea of the breath leads the action. I think sometimes with other modalities that can get lost a little bit. With yoga, it's very much like you don't move until you start breathing, and that's a great way of connecting to self. I think in terms of flexibility and making sure, like if you're talking about something that's like a little less Eastern sounding, right? It's this idea of you're making sure that you have that mobility, that you still have that range of motion and things like that, and that's just amazing. I just recently did a program, and it was a group program for seniors specifically, and there were like 3 people who had Parkinson's, and in terms of what yoga did for them, and it was like a workshopy type of thing. It was like a 5-week program or something, but it was really interesting from day 1 to 5 weeks in the future, right? Like in terms of like all the programming that they had done, like the ability to be like, oh, I can, like I feel comfortable getting on the floor, off the floor, things like that. Just whatever that was, you know what I mean? Like in terms of this idea of kind of connecting, and also mind body awareness. It
what
was
is
pretty profound.
what do you do in terms of specifics for
Hmm.
various parts of the body? I've heard of, in fact, my wife's got friends who take hot yoga.
Okay.
They go in and they sweat and whatever. I don't know why they do that. Maybe you can explain what hot yoga does versus hatha yoga and the others.
Sure, 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 sure. So with hot yoga, the advantage or the things that can kind of come out of it is it can kind of create flexibility, because when you think about it, when you warm up a muscle, um, it gets more flexible. So if you're not flexible, warming up a muscle can be really, really great. In terms of like just being like you get like I could do this before, and now I can do this. And you just get a little bit, you get looser faster, and you can kind of achieve those goals in a different way. In terms of and there are advantages to hatha, or sorry, into heated, in terms of it's also good for your nervous system, right? Because you're getting that blood flow everywhere, right? Think about it. When you're really cold, what happens? Your fingers freeze up, your toes freeze up. When we're heated, it allows that blood to go everywhere. And you're just like, oh, that's, and you get a little bit more sensation there. So there's a lot to be said about that. Now, the advantage of hatha, which is a lot more stable, it's slower movements, you're holding a position, it builds a kind of strength, it builds a foundation. it builds, like, they both do different things. I'm not going to say one's better than the other. I mean, again, the same thing. I would never say any modality of movement is better than the other. It's just like they're all great. It's just like, what is your body asking you for?
Okay, that's yoga, but
Yeah.
I noticed looking at the screen right now, it says aligned body
Ayurveda.
Ayurveda.
Yeah.
So I heard that term. I think I've been to a health food store and they got pills for that or
Yeah.
whatever. But so tell us, what is that Ayurveda?
So Ayurveda is basically, it's a way of looking at all of this. You were talking a little bit before about Western approaches. This is the ultimate Eastern approach, and it's kind of this idea of just how your mind and body connect, right? And they take it to a kind of a different level of just like, okay, what are you eating? What are you doing in this way? And all those things factor into your total body health.
It's like it's being a nutritionist.
Yes, so there's an aspect of that, but it's also just as a thing of like, okay, like, are you meditating? Are you moving correctly? Are you sweating? Are you having gratitude in the morning? It's like basically, okay, so what I would say about Ayurveda is this idea of just like those moments in time where you're just like, I'm so happy to be alive. I'm so like, this is it. This is, like if you're on a vacation and you're on the water or something like that, and you just look out in the ocean and you're just like, oh, this is beautiful. I'm just so happy. That kind of sense of self, of just being connected and happy. And what Ayurveda looks for is, okay, how do we make sure that we are healthy enough and happy enough and aligned and connected to our purpose to make that possible. And part of that is, where my bias is towards the movement things and things like that. But for sure, there's a lot of kind of different things we can talk about with Ayurveda in terms of Parkinson's.
Well, go ahead, take a shot at a little bit of it.
Okay, so some of the things are just like a kind of daily. So one of the things that's very important in Ayurveda is like daily habits, right? So some of the daily habits is just like, what are you eating? What are you waking up to? Like, when you wake up, like, are you expressing gratitude? Are you like, what are your habits and how are those helping you? Breath practice, right? Again, it applies to all the things that we were just talking about, but it kind of puts it under like an umbrella.
Well, with regard to all of these different modalities, I was calling it
Yeah.
something else a minute ago. With regard to these, does it go along with supplements? Vitamins, minerals?
Yes, there are supplements, and that would be something to talk about if you're interested in it with, the same way that you would with a doctor, until you're actually seen as but there's certain things that like there's certain herbs or spices, but like, I mean, like a kind of a general thing, if you're talking about Parkinson's, is you would probably want to be with more warming foods, more kind of self-heating foods, as opposed to like a lot of raw salads and just cold sandwiches or something like that. Because again, the same way that the heated yoga would work, the same idea, right? Is you're warming yourself from the inside out, and it's a kind of a comfortable, like it helps yourself. It helps the nervous system, the circulatory system, like work better.
How's pizza fit into this?
Pizza's fantastic.
I'm a big pizza person, so
there's I mean, and that's the thing. Also, there's this whole idea. There's a it's what brings you joy, right? So there's that too. That makes your life, it makes you connect, right? So the whole thing is connection. I love that you asked that, because it's like the whole thing is connection. So the same way that if pizza brings you that kind of like, you're just like, I'm so happy eating this. I am so connected. It's this like, I'm here. I'm in the moment. Awesome. Right?
You think happiness and food go together?
They can. I think what happens sometimes is like, if you eat pizza every day, you don't have that same feeling. Right?
No, I just eat pizza on Monday, but that's
okay. Well, and so that's exactly it. And so you look forward to it. And this whole thing. And there's there's levels of experience that go into it, including like how you feel, emotionally. And that's part of, what we would say, like, yeah, that's part of, living, right?
That's why I add oregano, because it gives it a little flavor.
There you go. And oregano actually has a kind of a cool a quality that helps it digest better in terms of like the cheese and tomato together.
Is that
Just so
right?
just so you know, even if you didn't know that, that's
I didn't know that.
yeah.
See, one
So
of the
it's
things
like,
that
so that's the thing is like you kind of take cues. Like nature actually will just tell you, like if you listen to your body, if your body's kind of aligned and things like that, it'll tell you what you need to do. For you, it's like with the boxing, right? In terms of that kind of stability, that strength, and all the rest of it, that's really important. And your body's telling you, like, I need that right now. I
in,
want
ter-
this.
in
And that's
terms
the
of
main thing.
dealing
That's it. It's just learning to listen to yourself.
with degenerative situations,
Mhm.
does being a vegetarian make any difference?
I think that's a personal choice. I think that there's certain people that I would, that do not do well with it. I do honestly think that part of your background and where you came from and stuff like that. Like, okay, so for example, I'm Indian. I came from a long lineage of vegetarians. There's no part in my body that wants like that needs meat.
So
But for
burgers are out, huh?
for me, yeah. But I mean, like, I've definitely, some of my closest friends and all the rest of it are, came from German background. They'll eat sausage all the time. They don't have any health. They don't have high cholesterol or anything like that. If I did that, I would not, I do think there's something to be said about just kind of gauging where you came from. My husband, who's Italian, he can eat pasta day and night and pizza all the time and does not have the same results that I have from it in terms of just, just feeling like I'm tired now. He's like, I'm good to go and all the rest of it.
So we've talked about yoga, we've
Mhm.
talked about Pilates, we've talked about
Ayurveda.
Ayurveda.
Yeah.
Anything else that you can think of that you're involved with that you think is helpful to people who are watching this show who may have other Parkinson's is just one, but
Okay.
there are other situations, and we're looking to promote and educate the public as what options they have. This show today is about options.
Yeah.
We've already talked about medicines and
Yeah.
surgeries and things like that, and progressive situations. So I'd like you to add anything else that you think, as a person who specializes in, basically, I call it Eastern medicine, and that you think would be helpful for the audience to know that they could use in a practical way that is ultimately going to help them. The degree, of course, is unpredictable, but at least to some degree, you think should be added to the mix.
Yes. Okay. So, in terms of for anyone who is dealing not just with Parkinson's, but any issue, there is a kind of we're never a Western medicine, like in terms of if you break a bone, there's nothing else you can do, in terms of medications to help mitigate things like that. But there's also something you can do to help heal yourself that comes from listening to yourself and what your body needs. And that can take a bunch of forms. The way that I think about it, what I specialize in specifically is movement. And, what does your body need to connect to itself and to what you're thinking? Um, so, in terms of what I would encourage people to have, regardless of where they are, or what they might have and what they might not have, is listening to themselves and kind of seeing what their body is asking for and what it's needing. And that's kind of the first step of, helping. And making sure, like, you want to, like, so for example, like, one of the things that I do with Parkinson's is I always recommend that people do oil massage for themselves, which is just kind of like warm oil is best, but like in terms of like touching fingers and hands and that kind of stuff to just kind of connect in, just things that help us connect uh, to our bodies and like how their bodies are feeling and, emotionally, physically, the whole thing. So those are, I don't know. Does that sound, I hope that doesn't sound too abstract, but it's more
Well,
just like,
I hear people all the time. In fact, even yesterday, when people are stressed or they're having any of these physical manifestations, they say, breathe. Of
yeah.
course, you're going to breathe anyway, or you're not going to be vertical. But the reality is, people talk about take a breath through your nose, blow it out through your mouth. What does that do for you?
So I love that. Thank you. So breathing re-regulates your nervous system, puts you out of fight or flight, and gets you kind of recentered. So you can go, and it has a bunch of different other applications as well. But the most one of the things I recommend to anyone who's just starting out and maybe they haven't done any of the stuff before, maybe they haven't done any mindfulness, they've just done whatever kind of thing. 5 deep breaths, right? Because if you think about um, you're breathing in to the body and then you're letting go, right? And it can be as simple as that. And it does a great deal. You can just even try it yourself. Like if you inhale and then it just immediately drops the tension. Why? I mean, like, and I'm sure, like, very sciencey people can give you exactly the reason for it. But honestly, it's like just allowing yourself to re-regulate, allowing yourself to take presence, is huge.
How about massage?
Massage is amazing.
I mean, I love getting a massage, but the fact is,
How
there
often do
has
you
to be
get a
some
massage?
therapeutic reason for it. Is
Oh,
there?
you want an excuse to get a massage?
I don't need any excuses.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So it's just like this thing. I'm just like, honestly, like any kind, you can do a massage on yourself. Like whatever, you can kind of just touch into this, and it's another way of bringing sensation into all points of your body. Which is amazing for Parkinson's, but it's amazing for everyone. Honestly, it's just like this thing of just like it's we kind of say like, oh, this is the treatment. It's like, no, these are things that we all need, right? And if we get a little further away from it, maybe we need a little bit more of it.
What about walking? I have heard from many people in the medical world that walking is very good for people with Parkinson's and other diseases as well.
Yes.
What does that do for you?
So there's a bunch of stuff that can happen from walking. It's this idea again. It's the whole mind body connection. I feel like if you're not paying attention, you can just fall over, right? It's just like this thing of like you have to be completely connected, right? If you're walking outside, you're just breathing in natural air, which we didn't really talk about in terms of Ayurveda, but it's a kind of important thing of just like, are you just kind of in your house all the time and just kind of here, or are you kind of connected outside? And all those things also have a part of it, but like that's part of walking. But like in terms of like, think about it, you have to use your whole body from the top to the bottom if we're talking about movement. And then we have to think about like, it's not just that like you're moving all the joints and parts, but something's got to be going on here that's making you do that in terms of like holding awareness and staying present.
Well, one of the potential manifestations in Parkinson's is balance.
Mm-hmm.
And the classes that I take focus a lot on that as well. How does the programs that you're talking about affect balance, if at all?
So they'll all require some balance, right? So in terms of, let's focus on the movement aspect of it. With yoga, I mean, if you can just Google it if you haven't. I mean, if you haven't done it, if someone who's listening hasn't done it, like you see people like standing on one leg and one hand's out here and all the rest of it, balance, and so it really does help connect that. In terms of Pilates, what I like Pilates for is it comes from like it really focuses on holding stability. So it'll put you maybe in a more of a like lying down position or seated position, and then moving from there and working from the core, which in turn creates balance because you're strong and then you can move from there.
So all of these things are,
They're all good.
well,
I mean,
well,
again, it's like even I like honestly, like to be quite honest, like the whole thing with boxing, if you are doing it the way that it's, I know that you are, right? But like if someone's doing it correctly and they're working from their insides, their core and all the rest of it, and they're working on the balance and like all the rest of it, it's exactly the same. The only difference is like what appeals to you, what makes you feel connected.
so I guess it comes down to the mind versus the body at the end of the day, right?
Mind and body. Yeah, like in terms of just like, where are you, what's going to connect you? What's going to make
Well,
you feel good?
well, there's certain thing called consciousness, and if I always used to say, I still say actually, the winners win and the losers lose. Why is that? Why if somebody take a shot from mid-court in a basketball game and it goes in from 60 feet, 70 feet, or a golfer misses a 3-foot putt? I mean, it's what they do for a living. And I personally believe that a lot of it has to do with your subconscious, if you want to call it that. And so what you're talking about is that basically a consciousness effort that you're suggesting various modalities to reach that consciousness.
Yes, I would say that especially with the Ayurveda, it's very much about getting in touch with what are those, I don't want to call them limitations, but what are those biases inside of yourself that create the, like, why did you miss that putt and things like that? Like, it's like this thing of like, okay, is it a connection? Are you feeling badly? Are you feeling like, unloved or things that, any of that kind of crap we bring into stuff, right? And it's just like,
Right.
okay, so how do we deal with this with tenderness? How do we deal with this like from a place that we don't have to like, you're not just in a shrink's office, and that's part of it. That's not bad at all. I'm not saying that. But are there other things that we can bring into our daily life that we're doing this on a daily basis that allows us to feel that kind of centering and
Well,
nurturing?
you look at somebody like Steph Curry,
Mhm.
basketball player.
Yeah.
He shoots from all over the place, and they seem to go in most of the time. And yet you have other players that just can't seem to get even a 3-foot layup. And doesn't that tell you that there's some
The mind.
consciousness effort that's
Yeah.
coming from the desire to win versus
100%. 100%.
that's
And
why
like
the winner.
linking that, right? Your mind and your body, right?
Well, that's why you see people who are at the top of their game, whether it's Michael Jordan or Connor McDavid in hockey or football players and whatever. The winners are the winners.
Yeah.
And other people can't seem to be in the right place. Coaches that get jobs, they can't get a winning team going. And then the following year, somebody else comes in, turns it around, and they win.
Mhm.
There are unseen conscious things that are occurring. Does your practice encourage a
100%.
nurturing of the consciousness so that the mind does produce a better physical result?
Yes, 100%. It's very much you summarized it very, very well. It's just this thing of our consciousness of what we believe it to be. So it's just like this thing of like we can kind of create that, and we can create our successes, and we can create, um, you know, um, the word for it, and you've probably heard it is karma.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I talk about it in terms of what's called cause and effect.
yeah,
Not that we're not.
exactly. So that's exactly it. So it's exactly the same thing. All these things are actually very, very related. It's just uh, we're what language we're used to with it, and what
Well,
resonates for people. But
well,
you know,
we're not going through basically all of the elements for all of these things,
yeah,
but if you do
there
good
is a
things,
connection. Yes.
we're not going to do this whole philosophical discussion. We
Yeah.
did that other time. But I do know, absolutely know, and I know historically it's proven that when you do good things and you share your blessings with other people, it's a boomerang. It comes back to you in blessings. When
Mhm.
you steal from somebody, it's terrible for your health. It's the worst thing you could do is speak badly about somebody else because it boomerangs back. And who do you think it hits at the end of the day? This old expression about vengeance affects two different people, you and them. But the reality is, isn't that what you're doing now? You're trying to train your consciousness to do the right thing and to make a difference in your treatment.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so beautiful to hear you say it, because that's basically it. It's just, it's whatever, and we know that. We know when we're doing the right thing. We know when we're aligning.
Well, I've often used this example of the lawyers who bill it by the hour. They
Hmm.
can add an extra quarter of an hour here and a quarter of an hour there. The client is never going to know unless they're practicing lawyers themselves. But somebody else knows. It's
Yeah.
you. And at the end of the day, like you said, karma comes back to get you at the end of the day. So on that positive note, I think we'll kind of end today's discussion. But I just want to mention to the audience what's coming up, because it's going to whet people's appetite. We're going to have an economist going to talk about tariffs. We hear about it every day in the news. We don't know what it is and when it is and how effective it is. So we're going to have an economist. World effects. We plan to have some interesting people. We have already interviewed Robert Kennedy Jr. We've already interviewed a lot of, we'll call them famous people. And we're going to have somebody talking about world affairs. We're going to get into the discussion of what's going on at college campuses right now, free speech versus some element of control, like the universities and what the president is doing now to somewhat control the hate that exists on those campuses. We're going to talk about constitutional issues. We've had Alan Dershowitz now, I think, 5 or 6 times. We're going to talk a little bit about politics. Roger Stone, who we've had on the show 5 times, is coming back, I think. I hope so. And then we're going to have somebody talk about not only the constitutional issues, but where we were going in terms of predictability. Are we really heading in the right or the wrong direction? So for all of you who are interested in any of these subjects, they're coming up. So I invite you to join us again. How does somebody get in touch with you, Rachel, if they want to learn more?
Yeah, thank you. My website is Aligned Body Ayurveda. And my social handles are r.sun, S-U-N, .moves, M-O-V-E-S. Yeah,
Okay, well, I want to thank you for taking the time today
thank you.
to really educate us on alternatives. These are options for all of us that are out there. Whether you do A, B, C, or D, it's what your desire is. It's going to ultimately determine the outcome. But you provided us with alternative methodologies, and I think it's very helpful. So, again, thanks very much, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Judge.